basic thesis underlying my remarks today is this: that Ahmadinejad's Iran, I always add when I say this, and I use this term to distinguish it from the people and publics of Iran who are otherwise the targets of massive domestic repression, has emerged as a clear and present danger not only to Israel and the Jewish people, but to international peace and security, as well as to its own people. Indeed, what we are witnessing in Ahmadinejad's Iran is the toxic convergence of four distinct yet interrelated threats. One, the danger of a nuclear threat. Two, the danger of state-sanctioned incitement to genocide. Three, the danger of state-sponsored terror. And four, the danger, which was unmasked because it existed even before the fraudulent elections of June 12th, the persistent, pervasive, and pernicious assault on the human rights of the Iranian people. Let there be no mistake about it. Iran is in standing violation of the obligations that it has not to develop enriched uranium to become an atomic power, and not only has it violated UN Security Council resolutions and the like, it has been a serial deceiver with respect to the nature and extent of its violations. You know, we woke up this morning to the news that, and you can look at the front page today, Herald Tribune, New York Times, arouses, that a draft accord had been signed between the US and Iran on the nuclear issue. Well, as the chairman told us, that has already been repudiated by Iran. This is part of that kind of serial deception and duplicity, and it may yet get signed. I have some benchmarks about how one should identify it, but I just want to move on in this regard. Second, Iran has already committed the crime of incitement to genocide prohibited under the Genocide Convention. Third, Iran appointed as its defense minister, while negotiations were going on with the Western powers, appointed a man, Ahmed Vahidi, who has been held responsible for perpetrating the massive terrorist attack on the Jewish Community Center, the AMIA in Argentina, and where there is an Interpol arrest warrant out for the defense minister of Iran, who continues to be welcome in capitals. Four, the Iranian regime, as I mentioned, is the author of widespread and systematic attacks on the Iranian people, which include arrests, beatings, torture, rape, murder, disappearances, and execution. Second, while we focus understandably and necessarily on the nuclear threat, such engagement or negotiations must not be limited to the nuclear threat alone. Otherwise, it runs the risk of ignoring or marginalizing or sanitizing the other three threats to which I referred, and which are inextricably bound up also with the nuclear threat. The danger of state-sanctioned incitement to genocide, state sponsorship of terrorism, massive domestic repression of the Iranian people. At this point, if one focuses only on the nuclear issue from a strategic point of view, we run the risk, and with an accord that is only on the nuclear issue, and an imperfect one at that, of not only emboldening the regime, but indeed appearing to abandon, if not in fact abandon, the protesters themselves. Which brings me now to a third initiative. Unlike the nuclear threat, which Iran even denies that it is engaged in developing nuclear weapons, and there are many who sometimes question whether in fact there is conclusive evidence in that regard. What is clear is that the evidence regarding the other three threats that I mentioned is clear, comprehensive, and compelling. Accordingly, engagement needs to be organized around the four sets of threats. If Secretary of State Hillary Clinton repeated yet again yesterday the prospect of crippling sanctions should a nuclear accord not be reached, I believe what is necessary is to develop a strategy, but a serious strategy, of targeted, calibrated sanctions that engage the other three sets of threats. Time does not permit to go into these comprehensive and calibrated set of sanctions, so I'll just use some one-liners for that purpose. Directly target the refined petroleum imports in Iran. Cut energy investment. Target the Iranian banking industry, and particularly the central bank. Sanction companies that enable Iranian domestic repression by selling them surveillance equipment and the like. Target the Iranian Revolutionary Guards and those who do business with them. It's not always understood that the Revolutionary Guards, who are increasingly engaged in the militarization of Iran, and generally told us, control over 80% of Iran's foreign commerce, and use domestic law for purposes of engaging in travel bans and asset seizures against leaders in Iran who are engaged themselves in furthering any and all of these threats. Brings me now at this point to the fourth initiative that needs to be taken. As I mentioned earlier, Iran has already committed the crime of incitement to genocide. Indeed, the witness testimony before our Canadian Foreign Affairs Parliamentary Committee, which has been looking into the danger of a nuclear genocide, rights-violating, terror-sponsoring Iran, has already determined that the critical mass of precursors respecting incitement to genocide in Ahmadinejad's Iran already exceeds that which existed in Srebrenica and Rwanda, and which took those countries down the road to genocide. And so, as the witness testimony again and again told us, that preventing such incitement is not a policy option. It's a legal obligation. State parties to the Genocide Convention, like my country, Canada, like the US, are obliged to undertake the remedies mandated by the Genocide Convention and international law to bring Ahmadinejad's Iran to account. Similarly, with respect to the massive domestic repression of human rights, here too, one must hold Iran to account. Otherwise, and Elliot made this point, and more eloquently than I could, that we run the risk of emboldening the regime while abandoning the protesters, and doing so in a way that also sanitizes the violations as they continue in our ignoring of them and are focusing, and even here ineffectively, only on the nuclear issue. Finally, in terms of the initiatives that need to be undertaken, part of a fourfold strategy involving a comprehensive set of calibrated, targeted sanctions is because you never know, if you want to internationalize, and I believe we need to internationalize the strategic attitude, you never know which country might respond to what set of arguments. For example, when I was in Germany and talking with German leaders, I found some of them not always responsive on the nuclear threat issue. I would hear, well, you know, it's not clear, the evidence is not conclusive, that they are in fact seeking to develop nuclear weapons. But when I brought up the issue of state-sanctioned incitement to genocide, and said, this is something that you should understand, and understand the danger of the threat, that did resonate. Whereas when I went to Sweden with Swedish leaders, the human rights issue resonated more with the Swedes. So what I'm saying is we have to factor the four sets of interrelated threats into international strategic advocacy in that regard. And I close now at this point with an important matter of principle and precedent to which Elliot referred to, and he was clearly engaged in this. And that is, we did not abandon the political prisoners in the Soviet Union, nor did we abandon the Soviet Jewry movement because we were engaged, among other things, with respect to arms control agreements with the former Soviet Union. And so I end where I began. Iran, not unlike the former Soviet Union, constitutes a standing threat to international peace and security, as well as to its own people. That is what motivated some 60 leading genocide experts, international law scholars, human rights people, parliamentarians to endorse a petition titled "The Danger of a Nuclear Rights Violating Genocidal Inciting Iran, the Responsibility to Prevent." And I'll quote from the conclusion of this petition by this group of, as I said, scholars, parliamentarians internationally, including amongst them a not insignificant number of Iranian human rights people and Muslim scholars and the like, who put themselves on the line and clearly, endorsing this petition. And they said as follows: bringing Ahmadinejad's Iran to account is not a policy option. It is and remains an international legal responsibility. The time has come for international action on behalf of the people of Iran, on behalf of justice, and in the pursuit of an authentic peace.